Millionaire laughed at his brother, who inherited only a goose from his father. But a year later, everyone was stunned by the outcome. The sun had not yet risen when Jonathan Thompson woke up on that autumn morning in Maple Valley, a quiet town in the countryside of Chicago. His tired eyes reflected the sleepless nights of the past few weeks, a period during which his father, Arthur Miller, owner of the largest farms in the region, had passed away. Dressed in his best suit, he prepared for the reading of the will, which would take place in a few hours. On the porch of the main house at Oakwood Farm, his younger brother, Nathaniel Thompson, was already sitting in a rocking chair, gazing at the horizon with a cup of coffee in his hands. At 28, Nathaniel had always been the opposite of Jonathan. While the older brother at 35 was only interested in the numbers and profits of the farms, the youngest had an almost mystical connection with the land and the animals. "Good morning," Jonathan said curtly, walking past his brother without waiting for a response. In the yard, an old white goose, which had lived on the property for years, honked softly as it nibbled on the grass. Nathaniel smiled at the sight of the animal, remembering the countless times his father had said that Goose was smarter than many farmers out there. Mrs. Carmen, the housekeeper who had served the family for 3 decades, was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. The aroma of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but even that couldn't ease the tension that hung over the house. In a few hours, Dr. Harrison, the family lawyer, would arrive for the reading of the will. At exactly 9 o'clock, the lawyer drove through the farm gates in his black car. He was a methodical man, known for his discretion and seriousness. In the main room, furnished with antique rosewood pieces, Jonathan sat at the head of the table, while Nathaniel took a seat on the opposite side. Between them, Dr. Harrison arranged his documents with surgical precision. "Gentlemen," the lawyer began, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, "we are here for the reading of Mr. Arthur Miller's will. As you know, your father was a man peculiar in his decisions." Jonathan Thompson fidgeted uneasily in his chair. He knew his father's ways well, always with his unconventional ideas, his unorthodox methods of managing the farms. Nathaniel Thompson, on the other hand, remained calm, as if he already knew what was coming. "Proceed, doctor," said Jonathan impatiently. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Arthur Miller, in full possession of my mental faculties, hereby establish my last will and testament. To Jonathan Thompson, my eldest son, I leave the majority of my assets, the Oakwood Farm, Maple Valley, and Pleasant Retreat farms, as well as the properties in the city and the financial investments, with the exception of the special fund designated for the maintenance of Mrs. Carmen." Jonathan couldn't suppress a satisfied smile. These were extremely valuable properties, totaling more than 5,000 acres of the best land in the region. "To Nathaniel, my youngest son," the lawyer continued, "I leave the white goose that lives in the backyard of the main house, along with the small shed at the rear of the property." The silence that followed was broken by Jonathan's mocking laugh. "A goose? Dad left you a goose, Nathaniel? This has to be a joke." Nathaniel remained silent, his eyes fixed on the document in the lawyer's hands. Dr. Harrison continued reading. "I also include a personal letter for each of my sons, which should be read in private." Jonathan could barely hide his satisfaction. As the lawyer finished the formal procedures, he was already making plans to expand the business even further. Nathaniel, meanwhile, tucked his letter into the inner pocket of his jacket and headed to the backyard, where the goose continued its peaceful routine, oblivious to all the commotion. On his way out, Jonathan couldn't resist another jab. "So, little brother, have you thought about where you're going to keep your great inheritance?" "Perhaps I should build a palace for His Majesty the Goose." Nathaniel Thompson simply smiled, a serene smile that concealed a deeper understanding than anyone could imagine. As he walked toward the barn that now belonged to him, he pulled from his pocket the letter left by his father. Inside the yellowed envelope, besides the letter, was a small golden key. On the horizon, dark clouds began to form, foretelling a storm. The old goose, which now followed Nathaniel like a white shadow, let out a peculiar honk, staring intently at the sky. Nathaniel observed the animal's behavior carefully, recalling the words his father used to repeat. "Always pay attention to the signs, my son. Nature speaks to those who know how to listen." That same night, after the storm that swept through Maple Valley, Nathaniel found himself alone in the small barn he had inherited. The golden key found with his father's letter revealed its purpose. It opened an old oak desk hidden under a dusty tarp. Inside it, several handwritten notebooks contained meticulous notes about the farms in the region. With trembling hands, Nathaniel finally opened his father's letter. "My dear Nathaniel, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer here to guide you in person, but I have left you something far more valuable than land or money. I have left you knowledge. You were always different from your brother, always able to see beyond appearances, always patient enough to observe and learn from nature. The goose I left you is no ordinary animal. Over the years, I realized it possesses an extraordinary gift. It can predict the arrival of pests in the crops. Its peculiar behaviors, which we so often observe together, are precise signs. In the notebooks you will find in the desk, I documented every pattern, every behavioral change, and its correlation with the problems that arose in the fields. I know your brother will consider this inheritance a joke, but you will know how to make good use of it. Use this knowledge wisely, my son. Help our community, but never reveal the goose's secret. There are people who would not understand and could misuse this information. With love, your father, Arthur Miller." Nathaniel Thompson reread the letter several times, his father's words making more and more sense. He remembered all the times the goose had behaved strangely before some disaster struck the neighboring crops. His father always seemed to know when and where the pests would attack, and now Nathaniel understood how. Flipping through the notebooks, he found detailed notes. When the goose refuses to eat for 3 consecutive days, rust will attack the coffee within 2 weeks. If it spends more time than usual near a specific fence, that area is about to be infested with caterpillars. It was years of meticulous observations, a treasure trove of farming knowledge. Meanwhile, in the main house, Jonathan Thompson was also reading his letter, but with far less satisfaction. His father warned him about his greed and lack of care for the land, predicting that his hasty choices could bring serious consequences. "The land is not just a means of profit, my son. It is life and it must be respected," one passage read. The next morning, Nathaniel woke up early and found the goose restless, pacing in circles near the fence that divided Oakwood Farm from the Wilson property. With his father's notebooks in mind, he consulted the notes and identified the pattern. That behavior indicated the imminent arrival of a pest that could devastate the neighbor's soybean crop. Summoning his courage, Nathaniel visited the Wilson family. Peter Wilson, the patriarch, was a simple man struggling to keep his small farm productive. Carefully, Nathaniel suggested some preventive measures without revealing the source of his concern. "I noticed some signs in the soil and vegetation that indicate a possible problem," he explained, offering to help apply a natural pesticide. Peter, initially skeptical, eventually accepted the help after much insistence from his daughter Lauren, a young agronomist who had always admired Nathaniel's sensitivity to land issues. 2 weeks later, when the pest indeed arrived, the Wilsons' crop was the only one in the region to remain intact. The news spread quickly through the town. Soon, other farmers began seeking Nathaniel out, asking for advice and guidance. Discreetly, he began developing a consulting system, always based on the goose's observations and the knowledge inherited from his father. Jonathan Thompson watched the growing movement toward his brother's shed with a mix of disdain and curiosity. To him, it was incomprehensible how so many experienced farmers were listening to the dreamer brother, who had inherited nothing but an old goose. In his office at the farm's headquarters, Jonathan reviewed the latest financial reports with concern. His hasty decisions to cut costs on maintenance and prevention were beginning to show their consequences. The crops were showing signs of trouble, and the older employees murmured about how in Mr. Arthur's time this would never have happened. The sun set over Maple Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange. In the small shed-turned office, Nathaniel organized his notes, adding his own observations to his father's notebooks. The goose, his faithful companion, rested peacefully near the door, seemingly content with its new routine. On the horizon, dark clouds formed once again, bringing with them the promise of even greater changes to come. 3 months had passed since the reading of the will, and the small town of Maple Valley was witnessing a quiet transformation. Nathaniel's shed, once dusty and forgotten, was now bustling with activity. A discreet sign at the entrance announced Mendez Agricultural Consulting, Preventive Solutions for the Field. Lauren Wilson, the agronomist who had first believed in Nathaniel, now joined his team. Together, they developed a monitoring system that combined traditional knowledge with modern farming techniques. Of course, the true secret to their success, the Goose's special gift, remained known only to Nathaniel. "It's impressive how you can predict these situations," Lauren commented one afternoon as they analyzed maps of neighboring properties. "It's like you have a sixth sense for the problems of the field." Nathaniel smiled, discreetly stroking the head of the goose resting near his chair. The animal had become his shadow, accompanying him on all his visits to the farms. The farmers had grown accustomed to the unusual presence of the bird, some even joking that it was the mascot of the consulting firm. Meanwhile, at Oakwood Farm, Jonathan Thompson was facing his first major crisis. An unexpected pest had struck his coffee plantation, causing significant losses. The older employees whispered that in his father's time, such problems were rare, as old Arthur always seemed to know when and where to act preventively. "How is this possible?" Jonathan Thompson fumed in his office, reviewing the loss reports. "All the farms that hired Nathaniel's consultancy escaped unscathed, while our crops are devastated." The situation worsened when Anthony Rodriguez, his biggest competitor in the region, showed up at his door. He was a robust man known for his aggressive negotiation tactics and his envy of the empire built by the Millers. "I came to make a proposal, Jonathan," Rodriguez said, sitting down uninvited. "Your land is the best in the region, but you're having trouble managing it. How about a partnership?" Jonathan immediately refused the offer, his pride wounded by the insinuation of incompetence. After Rodriguez left, however, an idea began to form in his mind. If his younger brother could predict and prevent pests with such precision, maybe it was time to swallow his pride and ask for help. The next morning, Jonathan headed to Nathaniel's barn. He found his brother in a meeting with a group of small farmers, explaining sustainable management techniques. The goose, as always, was nearby, watching everything with its attentive eyes. "We need to talk," Jonathan said as soon as the farmers left. Nathaniel gestured to a chair, remaining silent. "Our farms are in trouble. I need your help." Nathaniel Thompson watched his brother for a few moments, recognizing how much it must have cost him to make that request. "Of course, I'll help, Jonathan Thompson. We're brothers, after all." That same afternoon, they began a thorough inspection of the properties. The goose accompanied them, showing agitated behavior in certain areas. Nathaniel, discreetly consulting his father's notes, identified several critical points that needed immediate action. Lauren Wilson, who accompanied them during the inspection, was impressed by the precision of Nathaniel's analysis. "It's like you can read the land," she commented, her eyes shining with admiration. However, not everything was good news. During the inspection, Nathaniel noticed Anthony Rodriguez watching them from afar, his interest clearly focused on the goose accompanying them. The animal, sensing the rival farmer's gaze, let out a warning honk. At the end of the day, Nathaniel met with Jonathan Thompson to present an action plan. "We need to implement several changes," he explained, showing a detailed map of the properties. "Some areas are especially vulnerable." Jonathan Thompson, swallowing his pride, accepted all of his brother's recommendations. Deep down, he felt a twinge of envy at Nathaniel's ability to understand so well what the land needed. What neither brother noticed was that, hidden in the shadows of dusk, Anthony Rodriguez was taking detailed notes. His eyes gleamed with a mix of greed and determination as he watched the goose, which seemed to be the key to Nathaniel's inexplicable success. The success of Miller Agricultural Consulting began to attract attention beyond the borders of Maple Valley. Large agribusiness companies started questioning how a small rural consultancy could achieve such impressive results. Among them was Agro-America, a corporation known for absorbing smaller companies. One Monday morning, a delegation of executives from Agro-America arrived at Nathaniel Thompson's modest office. Marcus Carter, the company's expansion director, made no effort to hide his disdain for the simple surroundings. "Mr. Miller," Carter began, adjusting his silk tie, "we've come to make an offer you can't refuse. Agro-America wants to buy your consulting firm. We're prepared to offer a substantial amount." Nathaniel, who was feeding his goose at the time of the executive's arrival, stood up calmly. "I appreciate the interest, but it's not for sale. Our mission goes beyond profit," Carter insisted. "Think carefully, Mr. Miller. With our infrastructure, your method could benefit farmers across the country. Besides, His eyes landed on the goose with curiosity. "We've noticed you always have that bird with you. Part of your method?" "Just a pet," Nathaniel replied, trying to mask his discomfort. "And my answer remains no." After the executives left, Lauren Wilson expressed her concern. "They won't give up easily, Nathaniel. Agro-America is known for using questionable methods when challenged." On the same day, Jonathan Thompson received a similar visit in his office at the farm. Carter got straight to the point. "Your brother refused our offer, but perhaps you can convince him. Of course, there would be generous compensation for your support." Jonathan surprised himself with his response. "I'm sorry, but I trust my brother's judgment. If he says no, he has good reasons." The news of the refusal to Agro-America's executives spread quickly through the town. The local farmers, who benefited so much from Nathaniel's services, showed their support. Peter Wilson even organized a small celebration on his property. "To our independence," toasted Peter, raising his glass, "and to Nathaniel, who never forgot his roots." During the party, Nathaniel noticed his goose was unusually restless. The animal paced anxiously around the yard, making sounds he had never heard before. Quickly consulting his father's notes, he found no record of that specific behavior. Lauren, noticing his concern, approached. "Something wrong?" "I don't know," replied Nathaniel, gazing at the horizon, "but I've learned to trust the signs." The next morning, the first rumors began to circulate. Some people claimed that Nathaniel's consulting used unconventional methods, possibly even illegal ones. Others questioned the real effectiveness of his techniques, suggesting that his success was merely luck. "It's them," said Lauren, tossing a newspaper onto Nathaniel's table. "Agro-America is behind these rumors. I know their methods." The situation became even more complicated when Anthony Rodriguez started visiting Nathaniel's clients, offering similar services at lower prices. "I can predict pests just as well as he can," he assured the farmers, although his results proved otherwise. Jonathan Thompson, witnessing all this, felt torn. Part of him still envied his brother's success, but another part was beginning to admire the integrity with which Nathaniel conducted his business. One night, as Nathaniel worked late in his office, he heard a strange noise coming from outside. The goose, which usually slept in a special pen near the barn, was honking desperately. When Nathaniel went out to check, he saw only shadows moving in the darkness and found the padlock on the pen broken. Lauren, who was also in the office finishing some reports, helped Nathaniel search for possible intruders. "We need to be more careful," she said, worried. "There are a lot of people interested in discovering your secrets." That night, Nathaniel decided to take the goose home. As he watched the animal settle into a corner of his room, he thought about how a seemingly insignificant inheritance had turned into something so valuable and dangerous. The attempted break-in at the goose's pen left Nathaniel on high alert. In the following days, he reinforced the barn's security and hired a night watchman, but he kept the animal at his house where he could protect it better. What he didn't expect was that this closeness would reveal even more secrets about the special gift of his winged companion. On a particularly restless early morning, Nathaniel woke up to the goose making a different sound, more musical than its usual honking. The animal was positioned near the window, its long neck stretched toward the sky. While going through his father's notebooks, Nathaniel found an intriguing note. "When he sings to the moon, major climate changes are on the horizon." The next morning, during coffee at the Central Bakery in Maple Valley, Nathaniel overheard comments about a concerning weather forecast. A prolonged drought was approaching, something rare for that time of year. His heart raced as he realized the goose had predicted this even before the meteorologists. Lauren, who was now spending more and more time at the office with Nathaniel, noticed his unease. "Something's different today," she remarked, watching him closely. "Did you discover something new?" Nathaniel hesitated. He trusted Lauren more than anyone else, except perhaps his father. After a moment of reflection, he decided to share part of his secret. "Lauren, I need to tell you something," he began, choosing his words carefully. "My father left behind more than just knowledge about farming. He developed a forecasting system based on signs from nature." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Jonathan. His expression was heavy with concern. "Nathaniel, we need to talk," he said, closing the office door. "Agro-America is doing more than spreading rumors. They're buying up the debts of local farmers to force them to sell their land." The news hit like a bombshell. Nathaniel knew many of his clients were facing financial difficulties, but he hadn't realized the situation was this dire. "That's not all," Jonathan continued. "Anthony Rodriguez is working with them. I saw him talking to Carter last night at the City Hotel." Nathaniel Thompson felt a tightness in his chest. The alliance between Rodriguez and Agro-America posed a much greater threat than he had imagined. His gaze fell on the Goose, which rested quietly in a corner of the room, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Lauren Wilson, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "We need to act fast. If this predicted drought really hits, many farmers won't survive without help." "Drought?" questioned Jonathan Thompson. "What drought?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. It was time to trust his brother as well. "Jonathan, remember how our father always seemed to know what would happen to the crops before anyone else?" Over the next 2 hours, Nathaniel shared the secret of the Goose with Jonathan and Lauren, showing them their father's notebooks and explaining how he had learned to interpret the animal's signals. Jonathan, initially skeptical, began to understand why their father had chosen to leave the Goose to Nathaniel. "So that's why you always know where and when to act," murmured Jonathan, flipping through the notebooks with reverence. "Dad knew exactly what he was doing when he divided the inheritance this way. And now I understand why Agro-America is so interested," added Lauren. "If they find out about this," Nathaniel interrupted her, "they can't find out, and we need to use this knowledge to help our community before it's too late." The three spent the rest of the day devising a plan. Jonathan Thompson, surprising everyone, offered to use his resources to help the most vulnerable farmers prepare for the impending drought. Lauren Wilson took charge of developing an affordable irrigation system that could be quickly implemented. That night, when he was finally alone, Nathaniel Thompson reread the letter left by his father. Now, more than ever, he understood the wisdom behind his words. The true value of that inheritance wasn't just in the Goose's special gift, but in the ability to bring people together for a greater good. In the makeshift pen in his backyard, the Goose let out a soft honk, as if approving his thoughts. Nathaniel smiled, recalling another frequent phrase from his father. "In nature, son, nothing is by chance. Every sign has its meaning, every creature its purpose." Meanwhile, in the shadows of the night, a figure watched Nathaniel's house with particular interest. Anthony Rodriguez had discovered something that could change the entire game in his favor. The Goose's prediction about the drought came true faster than anyone expected. In just 2 weeks, the sky over Maple Valley remained relentlessly blue, with no sign of clouds. The farmers who had followed Nathaniel's guidance were already implementing protective measures for their crops, but others were beginning to feel the first effects of the dry spell. At Oakwood Farm, Jonathan Thompson surprised everyone with his change in attitude. Following his brother's advice and their father's notes, he had completely transformed the way he managed the properties. The older employees remarked that he was starting to resemble the late Arthur Miller. "It's like your father has returned," Mrs. Carmen commented one morning, serving coffee to the brothers on the porch of the main house. "He would be proud to see the two of you working together." The partnership between the Miller brothers was producing impressive results. While Nathaniel provided technical guidance, Jonathan Thompson used his resources and connections to assist the small farmers. Lauren, in turn, was coordinating the implementation of preventive measures. However, the tranquility of that morning was interrupted by the arrival of Peter Wilson, breathless and visibly distressed. "Nathaniel, Jonathan," he called out, still catching his breath. "Agro-America is calling a meeting with all the farmers in the region. They say they have a solution to the drought." The brothers exchanged worried glances. They knew the corporation wouldn't act out of altruism. The meeting was scheduled for that same afternoon in the town's parish hall. Marcus Carter, impeccable in his Italian suit, presented Agro-America's proposal. The company offered low-interest loans to farmers to help them face the drought, using their land as collateral. "It's a trap," Lauren whispered to Nathaniel during the presentation. "They know many won't be able to pay." Carter continued his speech. "Additionally, we offer complete technical assistance. Our methods are scientifically proven, unlike certain local consultancies that rely on superstitions." His gaze met Nathaniel's, who remained impassive. At the back of the hall, Anthony Rodriguez smiled with satisfaction. When the meeting ended, some farmers were already heading to the table where the contracts were being prepared. Peter Wilson, however, stood up and asked to speak. "Before anyone signs anything, I'd like to say something," he began. "3 months ago, my crops would have been lost if it weren't for Nathaniel's guidance. He never charged more than we could afford and has always been by our side in tough times." Other farmers spoke up, sharing similar stories. Jonathan Thompson, observing the scene, felt a mix of pride and regret for having taken so long to recognize the value of his brother's work. The meeting ended in a stalemate. While some of the more desperate farmers accepted Agro-America's proposal, the majority decided to trust the methods that had already proven their effectiveness. Back at the office, Nathaniel Thompson, Jonathan Thompson, and Lauren Wilson were celebrating the small victory when they noticed something strange. The goose was restless, making high-pitched sounds and running back and forth. "I've never seen him like this," commented Nathaniel, quickly consulting his father's notebooks. He found no record of similar behavior. That night, Nathaniel had trouble sleeping. Something about the goose's behavior deeply unsettled him. His concerns were confirmed the next morning, when Lauren arrived at the office with alarming news. "Nathaniel, you need to see this," she said, handing him a document. It was a patent application filed by Agro-America for a biological system for predicting agricultural pests. "They can't," began Jonathan, who had just arrived. "They can," interrupted Lauren. "And there's more. Anthony Rodriguez is claiming that he developed the system and sold the rights to Agro-America. He has photos of the goose and is saying he can prove the method is his." Nathaniel sank heavily into his chair. His father had warned him about keeping the goose's secret, but now they were facing a threat that even Arthur Miller couldn't have foreseen. The news of Agro-America's patent application hit Maple Valley like a bombshell. Nathaniel immediately met with an intellectual property lawyer, Dr. Harrison, Richard Mendez, who did not bring good news. "The problem," explained the lawyer, adjusting his tortoiseshell glasses, "is that you never officially registered the method. Your father's notebooks are important evidence, but Rodriguez claims to have developed the system independently." Jonathan Thompson, who was attending the meeting, slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. Everyone in the region knows our father had been using this method for years." "Testimonies can help," continued Dr. Mendez, "but we need concrete proof that the system was already in use before Rodriguez's claims." Lauren Wilson, who was furiously researching on her laptop, found something interesting. "Nathaniel, remember that article that came out in the local newspaper 5 years ago about your father? There's a photo of him with the goose observing the crops." The discovery of the article was a small ray of hope. However, the situation became even more complicated when that same afternoon, court officers showed up at Nathaniel's office with a summons. Rodriguez was filing a lawsuit demanding the immediate suspension of the consulting firm's activities. "He claims we are improperly using his intellectual property," explained Dr. Mendez over the phone. "I'll file a response, but for now, you need to be very careful with your activities." The news spread quickly through the town. The farmers who relied on Nathaniel's work grew worried. They were in the middle of a severe drought and needed the consulting firm's guidance more than ever. Peter Wilson organized an emergency meeting at his property. Dozens of farmers attended, all willing to testify in favor of Nathaniel and his father. "I met Arthur Miller over 30 years ago," declared Mr. Joseph, one of the oldest farmers in the region. "He had already been using this goose to help us when Rodriguez hadn't even shown up here yet." As the meeting took place, the goose, which was accompanying Nathaniel, began to display peculiar behavior. It walked in circles, occasionally stopping to gaze at the sky with unusual attention. "Nathaniel," Lauren called discreetly, "look at this in your father's notebooks." She pointed to a specific note. "When the goose dances in circles under a clear sky, significant atmospheric changes are near. The circular pattern indicates the formation of low-pressure systems." Jonathan Thompson, who was observing the animal, had an idea. "What if we could scientifically prove that the goose actually predicts weather changes? Wouldn't that validate your father's entire system?" Jonathan's suggestion sparked an idea in Lauren's mind. As an agronomist, she had contacts at the state university. "I can talk to my old meteorology professor. He has equipment that can monitor atmospheric patterns." In the following days, while Dr. Mendez prepared the legal defense, Lauren and Nathaniel worked tirelessly with Professor Taylor from the university. They installed weather monitoring equipment on the farm and began scientifically documenting every behavior of the goose. Jonathan, on the other hand, used his business connections to investigate Agro-America. He discovered that the company had a history of questionable practices, including other attempts to appropriate traditional knowledge. One afternoon, as everyone worked in the office, Mrs. Carmen appeared with an old box she had found in the attic of the main house. "I found this among your father's things," she said, handing the box to Nathaniel. Inside it were dozens of old photographs, all carefully dated. In many of them, the father appeared with the goose, some from more than 20 years ago. But the real treasure was at the bottom of the box, a video diary recorded by Arthur Miller. "He started recording after he noticed the goose's special gift," explained Mrs. Carmen. "He said that one day it might be important." That night, Nathaniel Thompson, Jonathan Thompson, and Lauren Wilson watched the recordings with tears in their eyes. In them, Arthur Miller meticulously documented his observations about the goose's behavior and its correlations with climate changes and crop pests. "This is more than evidence," said Lauren, moved. "It's a detailed scientific record." The goose, which watched the recordings with them, remained strangely quiet, its eyes fixed on the image of its old companion on the screen. Outside, dark clouds began to form on the horizon, hinting at a significant weather change. Nathaniel looked out the window, then at the goose and finally at his father's notes. "I think we're about to face something much bigger than this legal dispute," he said, worried. The animal had started its circular dance again, more agitated than ever. The goose's agitation was not without reason. The next morning, Professor Taylor rushed into Nathaniel's office, carrying graphs and meteorological data. "I've never seen anything like it," he said, spreading the papers on the table. "The instruments are detecting an abnormal atmospheric formation. The prolonged drought has created conditions for an extreme weather event." Lauren examined the data with concern. "Does this mean—" "Yes," confirmed the professor. "There is a high probability of a severe storm in the coming weeks. The impact on the crops could be catastrophic." Nathaniel quickly consulted his father's notebooks. The behavior of the goose matched exactly the notes about extreme weather events. Jonathan Thompson, who had just arrived, realized the gravity of the situation. "We need to warn everyone," he said. "But how can we do that with this court order preventing us from giving advice?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Peter Wilson, who was in the office to pick up some documents, had an idea. What if it's not the consultancy issuing the warning? What if it's the community organizing itself? The plan began to take shape. The farmers would organize a general meeting of the Rural Association, where Professor Taylor would present his scientific data. Nathaniel and his team would participate only as members of the community. As preparations for the meeting were underway, Anthony Rodriguez made his own move. At a press conference organized by Agro-America, he presented his so-called revolutionary agricultural forecasting system. "It's a sham," murmured Lauren Wilson, watching the broadcast. "He's just repeating basic meteorology information." The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at the town gym. The place was packed. Virtually every farmer in the region attended. Professor Taylor presented his data, explaining in simple terms the severity of the situation. During the presentation, something extraordinary happened. The goose, which Nathaniel Thompson had discreetly kept in a corner of the gym, began to display a new behavior. For the first time, it emitted a series of musical sounds, unlike anything Nathaniel had ever heard before. Jonathan Thompson, who was flipping through his father's notebooks, came across an intriguing note. "Only once in my life did I hear the goose sing in this way. It was on the eve of the greatest storm I have ever witnessed." The assembly was interrupted by Marcus Carter and Anthony Rodriguez, who arrived with another officer of the court. "This is a violation of the court order," protested Rodriguez. "They are clearly providing consultation." It was then that Mrs. Carmen stood up. The housekeeper, usually so reserved, walked to the center of the gym with surprising dignity. "I have something to say," she announced, her firm voice echoing through the gym. "I worked for Arthur Miller for 30 years. All this knowledge that Rodriguez claims to have developed, I saw it born day after day, year after year." She paused, pulling a yellowed envelope from the pocket of her apron. "And I have here a letter that Mr. Arthur asked me to keep. He said it was to be opened only if something like this happened." The gym fell into absolute silence as Mrs. Carmen opened the envelope. The letter, dated 5 years earlier, contained not only detailed descriptions of the forecasting method, but also photos, dates, and most importantly, the official registration of the entire system. "My father thought of everything," whispered Jonathan Thompson, moved. Rodriguez and Carter left the gym visibly upset, but the legal drama was now secondary. The priority was to prepare for the approaching storm. In the following days, the community came together like never before. Under the informal guidance of Nathaniel Thompson and Jonathan Thompson, the farmers worked tirelessly to protect their crops. Lauren Wilson coordinated the implementation of erosion control techniques, while Professor Taylor monitored the weather conditions. The goose continued its circular dance, now accompanied by a mysterious song. Nathaniel spent hours observing the animal, consulting his father's notebooks, and comparing them with the professor's meteorological data. One night, as they worked late in the office, Lauren found Nathaniel gazing at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how my father knew," he replied. "He knew that one day we would need all this evidence, this protection. He knew that the true value wasn't in the goose itself, but in what it teaches us about working together and respecting nature." In the sky, dark clouds began to gather, and the wind grew stronger. The storm was coming. Dawn brought with it a sky heavy with dark clouds. Professor Taylor arrived early at Nathaniel's office, his weather equipment indicating conditions even more severe than initially predicted. "The combination of prolonged drought with this cold front is going to create an unprecedented storm," he explained, showing the data on his tablet. "The predicted rainfall could cause major flooding." The goose maintained its extraordinary behavior, alternating between the circular dance and the mysterious song. Nathaniel, studying the patterns, noticed something in his father's notebooks that had gone unnoticed before. Small maps drawn in the margins, marking specific areas of the region. "Look at this," he called out, spreading the notebooks across the table. "Dad mapped out the areas most vulnerable to flooding. He was leaving us a complete guide." Jonathan Thompson, who knew every inch of the family farms, began overlaying old maps with current satellite images. "The risk areas have grown with the region's development," he noted. "We have to act fast." Lauren Wilson was already on the phone, mobilizing the network of farmers. Peter Wilson offered his farm as a meeting point to organize preventive actions. Within hours, dozens of farmers gathered, bringing tractors, sandbags, and equipment. The mobilization caught the attention of the local press. Reporters arrived to cover the preparations, and the story of the goose that predicted the weather began to spread beyond the borders of Maple Valley. Marcus Carter, observing everything from his temporary office in the city, realized the situation was slipping out of control. Agro-America had invested a lot of money in the plan to discredit Nathaniel Thompson and take control of the local lands. "We need to act now," he said to Rodriguez. "If this storm really hits and they manage to protect the crops, we'll never get another chance like this." Rodriguez, however, was uneasy. The evidence presented by Mrs. Carmen had shaken his confidence, and he began to question his own actions. At the Wilson farm, the work continued intensely. Following the guidance of Arthur Miller's maps, the community built containment barriers and drainage channels. Jonathan Thompson made all the resources of the family farms available to assist the small farmers. "Dad always said a farm is only strong when the entire community is strong," he remarked to Nathaniel Thompson as they supervised the work. The goose watched the entire operation with peculiar attention. At a certain moment, the animal began to persistently head toward a specific area of the property. Nathaniel, following his instinct, decided to investigate. "Professor," he called after examining the spot, "we need to reinforce this area immediately. The soil is more unstable than it seems." Professor Taylor took some measurements and confirmed the observation. If they didn't reinforce that spot, severe erosion could compromise the entire containment system. While the community worked together, Lauren received a surprising call. It was a documentary producer who had seen the local news report and was interested in recording the story of the Goose and the Miller family. "This isn't about fame," Nathaniel said when she mentioned the call. "It's about preserving knowledge and helping other communities." By late afternoon, the first raindrops began to fall. The goose, for the first time in days, stopped its dance and song, assuming a vigilant stance. "It's time," Nathaniel murmured, consulting his father's notes one last time. Jonathan gathered everyone in the central barn of the Wilson farm. There, sheltered from the gradually intensifying rain, they finalized the last preparations and set up shifts for monitoring. It was then that Anthony appeared, drenched by the rain and with a troubled expression on his face. "Nathaniel," he called, his voice almost drowned out by the noise of the approaching storm. "I need to talk to you." The moment of confrontation everyone had been anticipating was about to happen, but in a way no one could have predicted. Outside, the first lightning bolts split the sky, illuminating a landscape that would soon be tested like never before. The rain poured heavily as Rodriguez entered the barn. His face, usually marked by arrogance, showed signs of genuine remorse. "I need to confess something," he said, addressing not just Nathaniel, but everyone present. "Agro-America. They're not just interested in the land. They found out about the Goose months ago through research on traditional agricultural forecasting methods." A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the storm outside. Rodriguez continued, "They approached me, offered money to discredit you and claim the method as my own. But after seeing the whole community come together, the evidence Mrs. Carmen presented, I can't go through with this." Jonathan, who had been observing his longtime rival, sensed the sincerity in his words. "What exactly is Agro-America planning?" "They want to patent not just the method, but develop an automated system based on it. They plan to replace traditional knowledge with algorithms and sensors," Rodriguez explained. Lauren, who had been focused on her weather equipment, interjected, "That's impossible. What the Goose does can't be reduced to simple numbers and patterns." As if to confirm her words, the Goose let out a sharp honk and began moving agitatedly toward the barn door. Nathaniel, well familiar with the signs, quickly consulted his father's notebooks. "Professor Taylor," he called urgently, "we need to check the creek dam now." Professor Taylor consulted his equipment and turned pale. The amount of rain. It's much heavier than predicted. The dam wasn't designed to handle this volume. The news mobilized everyone immediately. Jonathan Thompson took charge. "We need all available tractors and more sandbags. Rodriguez, your land borders the creek. Can we count on your help?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "My men and equipment are at your disposal." The storm raged outside, but the community worked tirelessly through the night. The Goose stayed close to Nathaniel Thompson, its signals guiding the team to the most critical points that needed reinforcement. By dawn, when the rain finally began to subside, Marcus Carter arrived with a team of lawyers from Agro-America. "This ends now," he declared. "We have a court order prohibiting any use of the so-called forecasting method." It was then that Peter Wilson stepped forward. "There's no method being used here, sir. Just a united community protecting their land, using knowledge passed down through generations." Other farmers spoke up, each sharing their story of how traditional knowledge, passed down by their elders, had always helped them predict and face the challenges of the land. Carter, realizing he had lost control of the situation, made one last attempt. "Rodriguez, you signed a contract." "We have proof." "I have something to show," Rodriguez interrupted, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "I recorded all our conversations, every threat, every bribe, every plan to manipulate the local farmers." The Agro-America executive turned pale. Lauren Wilson, who had approached with her laptop, smiled. "And I just sent copies of those recordings to several journalists covering the Goose story." The first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon. The storm had passed, and thanks to the community's joint efforts, the damage had been minimized. The Goose, exhausted after a night of vigilance, rested peacefully in a corner of the barn. Nathaniel Thompson watched the animal with renewed admiration. "You know," he said to Jonathan Thompson, "I think I finally understand why Dad left the Goose to me and the land to you. It wasn't about dividing the inheritance. It was about uniting us in a way only he could imagine." Jonathan smiled, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "And about teaching the entire community that true value lies in shared knowledge, not individual profit." Outside, the sun began to shine over Maple Valley, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm, but also by the unity of its people. In the weeks following the Great Storm, Maple Valley underwent significant changes. The story of the Goose and the community's unity gained national attention, attracting the interest of researchers and environmentalists focused on traditional rural knowledge. Agro-America, after the leak of Rodriguez's recordings, faced an unprecedented image crisis. The company was forced to abandon its expansion plans in the region and, more importantly, withdraw its patent application for the agricultural forecasting system. On a sunny morning, Nathaniel received an unexpected visit in his office. It was a representative from UNESCO, Dr. Isabella Sanders, an expert in the preservation of traditional knowledge. "What you have here is extraordinary," she explained, after hearing the whole story. "Not just the goose's special gift, but especially the way the community came together to preserve this knowledge." Lauren Wilson, who was participating in the meeting, had eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We are documenting everything. Mr. Arthur Miller's notebooks, Nathaniel Thompson's observations, Professor Taylor's meteorological data. We want to ensure this knowledge is preserved." Dr. Isabella Sanders made a proposal that would forever change the fate of Maple Valley: the creation of a center for research and preservation of traditional agricultural knowledge. "The center would be built right here," she explained. "A space to gather and study traditional farming methods from across the country, with your work as the starting point." Jonathan Thompson, who had arrived during the conversation, immediately offered a plot of land adjacent to Oakwood Farm for the construction of the center. "It was our father's dream," he said, "to turn our farm into a place of learning." The project quickly gained community support. Peter Wilson offered part of his land for the creation of a practical study area. Other farmers volunteered to share their traditional knowledge, passed down through generations. Even Anthony Rodriguez contributed to the project. Regretful of his past actions, he provided resources for the construction of a modern laboratory, where traditional knowledge could be studied alongside the latest agricultural technologies. "It's never too late to recognize our mistakes," he said, during a meeting of the Farmers Association. "What you taught me about unity and respect for traditional knowledge has changed my view of agribusiness." On a particularly meaningful afternoon, Nathaniel Thompson found something surprising among his father's notebooks. It was a letter addressed to him and Jonathan Thompson, with instructions to be opened only when the brothers were truly united. With tears in their eyes, they read it together. "My dear sons, if you are reading this letter, it is because you have finally understood the true meaning of the legacy I left behind. The goose, with its special gift, was never just an extraordinary animal. It is a symbol of the knowledge that comes from patient and respectful observation of nature. Jonathan Thompson, you received the land because you needed to learn that the true value of a property lies not only in its profits, but in how it benefits the entire community. Nathaniel Thompson, the goose stayed with you because your heart has always been open to learning from nature and sharing that knowledge with others. Together, you are stronger than you ever would be apart. The true legacy I leave is not the land or the goose, but the understanding that knowledge, when shared with wisdom and humility, has the power to unite people and transform lives. With love, your father, Arthur Miller." The goose, resting near the office window, let out a soft honk as if approving the words of its old companion. Lauren Wilson, who was organizing documents for the new research center, couldn't hold back her emotions. "Your father was a wise man," she said, wiping away a tear. "He knew that one day this whole story would need to be told." Nathaniel smiled, watching the activity on the farm through the window. Small groups of university students were already beginning to arrive, eager to learn about traditional farming methods. Among them were future agronomists, meteorologists, and environmentalists, all excited to combine academic knowledge with the wisdom of the land. "Father always said that knowledge is like a seed," Jonathan remarked. "It needs to be planted at the right time, nurtured with care, and shared when it matures." On the horizon, the sun began to set, painting the sky of Maple Valley with golden hues. The goose, true to its routine, watched the horizon intently, always alert to the signs only it could interpret. The story of the Miller family was just beginning a new chapter. A year after the Great Storm, Maple Valley celebrated the inauguration of the Center for Research and Preservation of Traditional Agricultural Knowledge. The building, designed with an architecture that harmonized modern and traditional elements, had become a symbol of the union between scientific knowledge and the wisdom of the land. On the day of the inauguration, farmers from across the region gathered for a special celebration. The center, which everyone affectionately called the House of Wisdom, already housed an impressive collection of records of traditional knowledge, not only from the Miller family, but from dozens of other farming families. "It's incredible how everything has changed," commented Lauren Wilson to Nathaniel Thompson as they observed the bustling activity. Now engaged, they were jointly managing the research department of the center, combining their academic backgrounds with traditional knowledge. Jonathan Thompson, who had become one of the strongest advocates for sustainable agriculture in the region, led groups of visitors through the experimental fields. The family farms had transformed into a model of integration between modern production and respect for traditions. "Just look," he explained to a group of young farmers. "These planting techniques we're using were developed by combining my father's knowledge with the latest scientific discoveries." The goose, now a true local celebrity, continued its observation routine with the same dedication as always. Nathaniel had created a special documentation system recording every behavior of the animal and its correlations with climate and agricultural changes. Peter Wilson, who had become one of the most beloved professors at the center, often told his students, "The goose taught us that nature always speaks to us. The secret is learning to listen." Anthony Rodriguez, fulfilling his promise of redemption, had turned his land into a preservation and study area. His expertise in agricultural management, now applied ethically, significantly contributed to the center's success. On a special afternoon during a practical field lesson, a young student made an interesting observation. The goose had started spending more time near a gosling of its species, which had mysteriously appeared on the farm months earlier. "It's as if it's teaching," commented Lauren, observing the two animals. Nathaniel smiled, recalling his father's words about how knowledge needed to be passed on. Mrs. Carmen, who continued to care for the main house with the same diligence as always, had her own theory. "Mr. Arthur always said that nature has its own cycles. Perhaps this new goose is a sign that the special gift will continue." Professor Taylor, who now headed the center's meteorology department, conducted fascinating research on the correlation between animal behavior and weather patterns. "What we're learning here is revolutionizing our understanding of weather forecasting," he explained proudly. On a particularly meaningful morning, Nathaniel found Jonathan Thompson contemplating the sunrise on the main house's porch. "You know, brother," said Jonathan, "sometimes I catch myself thinking about how different we were before. I only thought about profits. You only thought about the land. Father knew exactly what he was doing when he divided the inheritance that way." Nathaniel nodded, watching the goose and its young apprentice exploring the backyard. "He taught us that the greatest riches aren't always the most obvious ones." Lauren Wilson joined them, bringing the latest reports from the center. "Enrollments for the next course have already exceeded our expectations. We have interested participants from all over the country." The research center had become more than just a place of study. It was a meeting point where different generations shared knowledge, where modern science and traditional wisdom complemented each other, and where respect for nature and its creatures was the foundation of all learning. That night, as the full moon illuminated Maple Valley, Nathaniel, Jonathan Thompson, and Lauren gathered in the center's office for a small ceremony. It was time to add another volume to the library, a book telling the story of the Goose and the Miller family, written to inspire future generations. In the dedication, Nathaniel wrote words his father would surely approve of. "To all those who believe that true knowledge is born from the union of the wisdom of the past and the discoveries of the present. To those who know that nature is our greatest teacher, and that its signs are always there for those who learn to observe with the heart." The goose, as if understanding the importance of the moment, let out its characteristic honk. Outside, its young apprentice answered the call, and together the two animals gazed at the horizon, guardians of a knowledge that would continue to be passed down through the generations.